Welcome back to the Glow Up Girl podcast. I'm Kyra. All right, let's welcome Becky to the show. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you because we're going to talk about a topic that I love. I love to converse on with this community and on this show a lot because we all seem to always be trying to find ways to set our boundaries, maintain our boundaries, and no matter how much we talk about it, is hard sometimes. So, why don't we get started by having you tell the audience listening or watching who you are and what you do?
So, I am Becky Upchurch, and I am a mindset coach. And my current area of focus and passion is boundaries and really helping professional women to learn to say no, but not just to say no. I want them to learn how to say no with ease and without feeling guilty about it. Because as you mentioned, this is such a challenging area for so many people. And I find that sometimes even when we maybe have the ability to say no, it's all of the emotion that comes with it, all of the mental drama around how we feel about it, how other people feel about it, that really makes it much harder than it needs to be. So that's kind of my jam, and I love talking about it, and I can't get enough.
Awesome. And I love that. Thank you for that intro because you were sliding right into our first question. And the first question is why do we as women struggle, with setting those healthy boundaries?
So I think the number one issue for women is the messaging that we learn from pretty much birth about what it means to be a good girl, a good woman, a good wife, a good partner, a good mother, a good friend, a good employee. There is this expectation of we want you to be good. And when you are good, people will like you. And very often we are taught that being a good girl, a good person is saying yes, being agreeable. And that if you are not agreeable, if you push back, if you buck the system, then not only are you not a good person or a nice person, but people will not like you. And that is always something that I think about, just kind of looking at the way that humans in general are wired. We are wired for connection. And so anytime anything is feels like it's jeopardizing our ability to connect with others, we feel a sense of danger, right? That's just how we are. And so the idea that, oh well, if I set a boundary, if I say no, and potentially somebody sees me as a bad person, or they see me as difficult, or they see me as unlikable, then I'm also jeopardizing that relationship, that connection, or even more broadly, potentially how people on a larger scale may see me as a result.
Mhm. Oh yeah, that is definitely so true. And I think that connection, just calling out the connection and just how people perceive you, not wanting to have that, negative negativity or I think like because this does like roll into speaking about like misconceptions about, like trying to set them like you think about in the workplace a lot of times when people are in the workplace and if they can't really take on more work, oftentimes the women are already doing the work of many. So
Yes.
you're in the workplace and you're already doing the work of probably more than one person, and someone asks you, "Oh, and we really need you to step in on this project," and most times it's very hard to say no to that because we often feel like, well, if I say no, then I won't be considered for the promotion. I won't get the raise, or I'm not going to be seen as a team player. And that,
Absolutely.
yeah, and that is, I mean, it's really terrible because in real life, I think, I think because I'm just speaking from personal experience, because for me, as a person who used to struggle with setting boundaries as well, I would just take on things like at work.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, Kyra, can you do this? Oh yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Yep.
But meanwhile, on the inside, I felt like I was on fire because I had so much to do and I was always like working around the clock to try to get all the projects done. I came in early, I stayed late. I worked on the weekends and all those things, all because I could never just say, you know what, time out. I can't.
Yeah, and let's be realistic. I mean, everybody loves a workhorse, right? I feel like in any organization, if there's somebody that you know, like, oh, anytime I go to that person, they're going to
Mhm,
say yes, they're going to do it, they're going to come early, they're going to stay late, they're going to pick up slack if people are out. Like,
mhm.
of course, why wouldn't people want that? It's like if somebody said to me, I'm going to come to your house, I'm going to do all of your cooking and your cleaning and take care of everything, and I'm going to do your job for you. I'd be like, that sounds great. Who wouldn't want somebody to do everything for them? But just
Right.
because people like it when you do that does
Mhm,
not mean that you are expected to do it. And also, something that I have found that I think surprises a lot of people is people also really like people that hold strong boundaries because
mhm,
it makes them respect you tremendously.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I agree with that because I think on the other side of it, right, coming out of that almost like people pleasing, season, I would call it. Yeah, you're right. Because people begin to notice, and people, it's not that everybody just wants you to do something. And you're right. Of course, if you're going to take it on, they're going to dump it on. Like, that's
Mhm.
just like, that's human nature. Like, that's what people are going to do. And it was so funny because when I was preparing, like, I was like talking to my mom at lunch about like getting ready for this call. And I was telling her, I said, just thinking about this conversation that I'm going to have this afternoon and just thinking back in my professional career when I was younger. And I was like, oh, yeah, I was just taking on all the things, doing all the things because I wanted to, move up the ladder. And I was like, you know what? And it's so funny that like I was doing all this work. There was a girl that worked with me, and I remember being called into a meeting room one day because this girl was crying every day on the job because she couldn't get her work done. She had so much to do. And I was like, you don't have any more to do than I do. Like, I'm doing double the work already. And they called me in and literally asked me to take on more of her work. And at the time, I said yes, because I thought to myself, like, oh, well, of course, this is going to set me up for like, this could set me up for the promotion or whatever. And I remember like getting to a point to where we had layoffs within the company. And that girl was laid off and I wasn't. And I told my mom, I said, here it has taken me many, 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 many years to come to the conclusion that, I mean, why would you fire your workforce? Why would you fire the person who you can count on that's going to do all the things? They didn't want to have to do her work because they knew she was going to cry. They knew she was going to be crying on the job and they would have to do it. And so, I was just thinking about it and I was like, wow, like at that age, because I was about 20, I was pretty young then. I was like mid 20. So I wasn't at that point of being able to like speak out and stand up for myself. And that's why the work that you do and being able to share with a community for women of all ages, but especially for younger generations, for them to hear that it is okay. You can set the boundary because you have to put yourself first. Because the workplace, let's just be honest, the workplace is the workplace. And oftentimes, like, yeah, if you pass out and fall out tomorrow, they're going to find somebody else to do your job.
And I'll share an example from my own life of I had I again back in the day I had that mindset, go big or go home, do all the things, do
Mhm.
my job and everybody else's job and no problem and smile on my face and sure I've got it. And then I had some things happen in my life, some changes, and I just decided I wanted a different life for myself. I had lost some people that were close to me and it made me reevaluate my priorities. And I decided I wanted to step back in a massive way from what I was doing. And I remember going to my boss at the time and saying, I will continue to show up and do my job, and I will do it to the best of my ability, and I will give it 100%. But all of these extra things that I have been taking on for the last few years, and all the things I'm leading, and all the extra work, and the this and the that, I simply cannot do it anymore. And
Mhm.
I will never forget her response to me was simply, okay. And I remember having a conversation later with a colleague who was kind of, freaking out about it. She's like, and I'm in this meeting and you're not there. And I'm kind of panicking about the fact that, like, is nobody worried that Becky's not around anymore? Um, and initially, the workhorse part of me that attached my ego to being the go to and being the person was a little bit offended. because I was younger and I was less experienced. And again, there was a lot of ego tied to my achievement. And I didn't recognize initially what a gift it was. And then I realized she didn't say okay because she didn't see my contribution. She said okay because she saw my humanity.
Mhm.
And she knew that I needed for her to acknowledge that even me just doing 100% at my job was absolutely good enough. And I
Mhm.
think that's the thing that so many of us forget. We think we have to go above and beyond.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, I think it's often because it's that ego or it's that self-esteem. And we're trying to, it's that phrase that Brene Brown uses that has become so famous, the idea of hustling for your worth. I think she kind of coined that, even though I think it's been around a while. And so I think very often we sometimes don't realize that we're hustling for our worth. And the reality is when you truly learn your worth, you don't need to hustle. You stop the hustle because you realize, like I joke all the time. And what I often say to people is, I know what I bring to the table. I bring the table.
Yeah.
Like, and when you know that you
Mhm.
bring the table,
Mhm.
you don't have to show everybody all the decorations and all the extra things you brought for the
Mhm.
table. Because you're like, well, I brought this table. I did my
Mhm.
part. What did everybody else bring to the party?
Right.
And so having that ability to kind of take a step back and say, I am confident in who I am and what I do and what I bring, whether it be in a work situation, in a relationship, and resting in that confidence
Mhm.
helps us to take a step back from that need to people please.
Mhm. Now, the story you just told and just your own personal experience, is that why you're so passionate about helping people to set boundaries?
That is absolutely part of it because I feel like when we give ourselves and others the permission to just really determine how we want to spend our time, it's such a gift. But I
Mhm.
also think a lot about the relationship between yes and no, because I feel like things are always one or the other. So if I have a goal and I want to pursue it, so it's a yes, I want to do this thing. There are things in my life I may have to say no to in order to
Mhm.
free up the time and the energy and the bandwidth.
Mhm.
And the converse is true. If there are things that I don't want to be doing, I need to be able to say no to create that space. So I like to think about if I am someone who is a big time people pleaser, or maybe boundaries are like an impossibility in my life. So you ask me
Mhm.
to do something and I say yes. Every single one of those yeses means I have to say no in some other area of my
Mhm.
life. So
Mhm.
if I'm saying yes to staying late every night of the week at work, am I saying no to spending time with family? Am I saying no to seeing my friends? Am I saying no to rest? Am I saying no to exercise? What am I giving up? What is the trade
Mhm.
off? Right. So the ability to say no, the ability to set a boundary gives me the ability to say more yeses to the things that I want to do, the
Mhm.
things that light me up, and the things that I feel like I'm called to do in the world. And that's
Mhm.
kind of the other piece of it. I think sometimes people think about this as oh, well, you just want to say, yes more to yourself. Well, hey, that's not a bad thing. Saying yes
Mhm.
to ourselves doesn't make us bad or selfish. But also, sometimes it means saying yes to showing up in the world and for my people the way I want to. So I think
Mhm.
that's really why it's so important to me that people get comfortable saying no, because the more they get comfortable saying no, the more they can embrace more of the yeses that really, really matter to
Mhm.
them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I do think, as you talk about, even your mindset, it requires a mindset shift when you begin to be able to say and be comfortable saying no.
Mhm.
And thinking, and you have to think about it in terms of the way of like you just walked through, like if I say yes to this thing, what am I saying no to that really matters? What's important to me? Because a lot of times we're just saying people are just saying yes because, like you to the point, oh, I don't want to let somebody down, or I don't want to make someone feel bad, or and I think like you definitely have to become comfortable with it. Like I look at like for even myself, like now I have no problem saying no. It
Same.
rolls off quite easy these days. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna do that. Or, like,
No, thank you.
when people are like, oh yeah, like, well, don't you want to hang out? No, no, I'm
No.
good. And it's just like I choose how I spend my time. Time is very precious. it's limited, especially when it's like I have a every day a corporate job, I have this business. So my time, like personal time, is very important to me. And I like to spend it how I like to spend it. And I don't want to just spend it going on frivolous lunches or, hanging out with people who I'm like, no, we're good. I'm always good to catch up with somebody on a Zoom or, a call. But like, no, like the physical act of me going and like giving time is just really important. And I think like that is something long time ago. I would have been like, oh, my social calendar would have been like out of control because I'd be trying to fit all these people in that are like, oh, we haven't seen each other in a long time. Let's do this. Or do you want to work on this project with me? And I'd be like, oh yeah, yeah. Or just like when people like I'd always get caught up in like friends who had businesses. And so, like, they always like to come to me to brainstorm ideas. Oh, let's brainstorm, Kyra, because you give good ideas. And then I start to realize, like, we were brainstorming, or I was giving you ideas, but you were never doing anything with it. And every time we come back and we be in the same circle. And after I was like, you know what? No, no, not doing that anymore. You can
Yeah.
come up with your own ideas and implement them.
Right, right. Well, and that's the thing is I think that it's about finding that balance between, being supportive of the people that we care about and really
Hmm.
protecting our own time and energy. And, you brought up a really valid point about, I'm going to say no to this event or that event. Maybe we'll hop on a Zoom, we'll hop on a call. And I think it's okay to propose alternatives if that's something you want to do. But I
Hmm.
also think it's really important to recognize, obviously you and I aren't personal friends. We don't socialize. But just from what you shared, it's like, okay, well, if we were friends and I recognize that you're not somebody who says yes to every lunch invitation, or you're not always, oh, I got to go to dinner with friends every night. I know that when we do get together, we do meet for lunch, or we do grab dinner, or we do have a coffee, A, I feel like I'm going to get 100% of your attention because it's a purposeful
Hmm.
choice you are making to spend time with me and
Yes.
engage with me.
Mhm.
And I feel like I am going to feel 100% like you want to be there. And
Right.
that is actually going to strengthen our connection.
Mhm.
Because too often what happens is we think that, well, if I say yes, it shows that I care. But
Yeah.
over time, if I continue to say yes to you every time you ask,
Mhm.
but inside I'm actually becoming resentful because I don't want to be there,
Yeah.
what is that doing to our relationship? Right? It's not
Exactly. Yeah.
necessarily developing anything. And in fact, it can cause invisible fractures that can have real consequences.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point and a good one because yeah, I think people just you have to think about like what matters, and I like that you said like the intention behind it, right? Like it's not that I don't want to go out with you, but I'm intentional about who I spend time with and when, and then also just understanding that everybody's got a lot going on. Like that's what the thing that always before I like even like approach people that I do want to like have lunch with, like I recognize that like everyone is busy. Like this life is just like a mile a minute and everybody's got things. So it's like, oh, if your calendar allows and you want to get together, but I do always offer up. But hey, if we can't physically lunch, then we can Zoom lunch. If you've got like 30, 45 minutes, we just get on and catch up that way. And so I think that's important because then people don't feel the pressure because sometimes people do feel pressure like, oh my God, like she asked me, so I have to say,
Yep.
I have to say yes because she asked me and I don't want it because she may never ask again. And I'm like, no, it's not that serious. It's not that
Right.
serious because like I definitely get that. I'm definitely the meme of like every person where it says when someone cancels and they're already back on the couch. Like that is definitely I love you, but I'm also always really okay with like just chilling out at my house. So,
Absolutely. Same.
okay.
100%.
What are some other misconceptions people have about boundaries?
So I think that the big one we kind of touched on at the top of the show, which was just the idea that in order to be a good person, you have to be a yes person.
Mhm.
And so kind of related to that is just the idea of there are people, I think sometimes people have this perception that, there are people who are accommodating, and then there are people who are selfish. Or it's, there are people who have, a lot, they're super kind and generous. And then there are people who have really strong boundaries. And it's almost like it's presented as these two polar opposites. Like you can either be this or that. So it's like, well, do you want to be somebody who's accommodating, or do you want to be somebody who has boundaries, AKA someone who is difficult? And so I think one of the biggest perceptions is that those things cannot exist mutually in a human. And that is one of my biggest misconceptions that I will always try to address, because I think that I am somebody who has a lot of love and care for people, both specifically the people that I care about in my life, and also just for people in general. I mean, I do work that I feel like is of service to others. My life work motto is love self, serve others. I feel like it's very important, but I feel like those things go together. It is very, very true that the better we can show up for ourselves, the better we can show up for others. And so I like to think that I am somebody who has a very kind and caring heart. And I am also somebody who is exceptionally good at not just setting, but holding a boundary. And I can do it with a smile, but it's a smile that's going to say, oh, my friend, this woman is not going to budge. So save your breath. So I think that's a big, big misconception, is that you can't be both kind and strong in terms of holding a boundary.
I agree with that. I think that's I think those are great examples, because yes, because most times when people feel like, well, if I say no, they're gonna think that I'm mean, or they're going to think I'm not, oh, I'm not friendly or whatever. And to your point, because sometimes, like when you're serving yourself, for like, yeah, you've got to fill your cup to be able to help other people. And I feel like that's very true, because it's like, I'm like the same way. I was listening to you, Becky. I was like, Becky, are we like the same people?
I love it.
Like, it's like, yeah, I love, helping people. And I think like that drives me, but I'm also somebody who really loves like time by myself, like reading and watching TV and just like chilling out. Like, I don't have to be around a lot of people to be like, I get fulfilled by just like a lot of times just doing things like in my house, like catching up on a show, or reading a book, or playing with my puppy, or talking to my husband. Like, but it's weird because I think somebody said, they were like, oh, my husband says this because he likes to be out, like he's it's really funny because like you don't think he's social, but he is social in his own way. And like he's like in a bike club, and so like they like ride, and like 4th of July weekend was like a big weekend, and so he was like, oh, do you want to go? And I was like, well, I was like, I was going to go, but then, like the festivities didn't really start until like later in the evening, and it was like fireworks. And I was like, well, actually, I'm going to stay home with our dog Max, because I said, I can't leave in good conscience of thinking about him running around when our neighbors start like with the fireworks. And so he was like, well, and I was like, and also it's not fair to you to have you come back early when you want to, have this experience. And so he was like, oh, well, okay, are you sure? I was like, yeah. So then he left. I was pleased. I was like, yes, I get to watch Love Island. I can take a shower. I can watch Love Island. I can like chill out. And I was so ready to have a good time, because all day I was like, oh man, I committed to this, and now I'm gonna have to go.
Right. So much peopling.
I was like, I'm gonna have to go, and I was so excited, like about just being able to stay at home.
Totally
But
get
like
it.
for me, that's like about that's like a boundary for like I've set. Like I need to like just chill. Like I was like, nope, because I am not going, because I need to take care of Max. And I don't feel like this is the right thing to do, because And thankfully, I stayed home because our neighbors across the street were doing fireworks, and it felt like they were in our house. Like, and
Oh,
my dog
wow.
was like, and he was going wild, and I was just turning up everything in the house really loud to try to drown it out. But it's just like those things, like just sort of knowing like who you are and being comfortable like in your skin, as you mentioned, and being, just like confident in who you are, and that helps you when you're like setting boundaries, like no matter who they're with. So I think that's really important. And also, like, to your point, yes, you can be someone who loves to help people, and loves to make people's lives better, but then also you have to like focus on you, because if Becky's not getting what she needs, then Becky can't help all these people.
He's going to be too tired.
Exactly. So let's talk about people. People might be listening, watching out there and saying, I hear y'all talking, but how do I start? What's a good step for someone who might be struggling to set or even maintain boundaries that they've set?
So, and I love that you separate those out, because I think that's an important part of the conversation, because sometimes we talk about, oh, I just need to have more boundaries. But the setting of the boundary is one process. The maintaining and the holding of the boundary is another. And sometimes people can be really good with the setting of the boundary, knowing what to have a boundary around, what their boundary is. And then as soon as they get a little bit of pushback, it's like all bets are off, right? So being able to kind of master both of those things. So I would start with the former, start with setting a boundary, starting with, where do I need a boundary? What boundary do I need? But even before that, thinking about just boundaries, but also change in general. Whether it's boundaries, whether it's body image, whether it's building a habit, whatever it is. The best way to create a change is to make it easy on yourself to actually do what you need to do to create the change. And sometimes this is where we set ourselves up for failure, because we decide we're going to make a change, whether it be, I'm going to practice saying no more, or I'm going to start a fitness habit, or I'm going to start meditating, or I'm going to write a book, or whatever it may be. And we kind of go all in because we're excited, and then we burn out or we give up. And part of that is because people in general, I never know who does research and where to cite things. I just know it's like, oh, I read this thing and I couldn't tell you where. But I remember recently reading something, and it was just around the fact that we are designed to take the path of least resistance. So if I'm presented with two different options and one of the options is easy for me, that's the option I'm going to gravitate toward. Right. We like to stay safe. We like to stay comfortable. It's very hard for us to kind of get out of that wiring, that programming. So the easiest way to kind of make that shift is, I think of it as kind of hacking our brain in terms of like, well, I don't want my brain to tell me this is too hard, so I have to make it super easy. Because if I make something super easy, it's really hard to argue that I can't do it. Right. So it's like, if I'm going to practice, setting boundaries, I need to make it as easy as possible to get started. So, okay, I'm going to start with, how do I set a boundary? Okay, well, let me start with, how do I know I need a boundary? Okay, well, what area of my life do I maybe want to start with? Okay, well, where is it really, really, really hard for me to set a boundary? Because I'm not going to start there, right? I'm going to start where it's easy. And I always give the example to people of, for most of us, everybody has different relationships. But I think for most people, starting with like, well, I'm going to set a boundary with my mother is probably not the easiest starting point, right? Because we have that biological connection in many cases, or we may have, decades of relationship of, certain perceptions of what it means to be a good child. So starting with somebody that we are super, super, super connected with and very emotionally invested with is probably not the easiest place to start. So if I'm somebody who's terrified of saying no and setting a boundary, I'm going to start with someone who's maybe very easy. So it might be, you know what, I'm going to start with saying no to that coworker who's like every week is inviting us out for happy hour. And I don't really know her well, and I'm not really emotionally invested. And I have only known her a couple months, but my goal now is going to be to say no to weekly happy hour next week. That's kind of the low hanging fruit, as opposed to, oh, well, I'm just going to practice saying no to my mom when she wants to talk to me on Saturday mornings or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I would say choose a starting point that feels like low hanging fruit, that starts easy, and then figure out what the boundary needs to be. So if it's something like with the coworker, if it's just, I really just can't do the, weekly happy hour, then it might just be, I have to practice saying no. And then if I know that person's going to push back, okay, well, how do I want to respond in that situation? So having a plan for what am I going to communicate? And then also, how am I going to respond if my communication is received a certain way? Because that's the piece that I think a lot of people struggle with. So sometimes when we say, oh, I'm just going to say no, and a lot of us feel like we have to explain our no. Fun fact, no is a complete sentence. So you can just say no, thank you with a smile and let it go. If you want to explain more and say, oh, no, thank you, I already have plans, or no, thank you, I don't like to go out during the week, or no, thank you, I don't drink. If you want to add something on and you feel comfortable with it, great, but don't feel obligated. But if you know that person's going to push back, because it's like, well, every time anybody's ever said no, she pushes back, she makes a big deal out of it, then you go in prepared, right? And that's the other piece. Sometimes we just say, well, I'm going to set this boundary and I'm excited. And we stop there and we don't think forward to, and what if the person pushes back? And I like to tell people, go in with the assumption that your boundary will be pressed on, that the person will not accept it, that they will push back. And often I think the response to that, especially as you start practicing with people that you are closer to, I think people personalize that. It's like, well, I set this boundary with my partner. I set this boundary with my best friend. I set this boundary with my sibling, and they had this response. And they were just, I can't believe how disrespectful they are. I can't believe that they are not respecting my boundaries. I can't believe that, well, believe it, because again, we are wired to not like change, which means when I change my behavior, you, person who is very comfortable with the way I am, is going to suddenly be uncomfortable because it is different and new and it makes you feel uncomfortable. That doesn't mean you hate me. It doesn't mean you're disrespecting me. Yes, there are some people who will disrespectfully push up against our boundaries because they're just jerks. That's a different conversation. But sometimes people who love us and care for us will push back on our because they don't understand them or they're uncomfortable. A, that's on them and it's okay and they're allowed to do that. B, we don't need to take that on. So that kind of next step of, how do we get started? Well, I'm going to set the boundary. How am I going to communicate the boundary? And then assuming that person doesn't take it well, what do I want to do in response? And practicing that. And it's I'm obviously simplifying the process, but really working through, okay, well, if I get pushback, instead, like, I don't want to give in and say, okay, I'll just go. And I don't want to get mad and lash out at this person. How do I want to show up? And that's a question I think is important to ask ourselves, again, in all things, but especially in boundaries, is how do I want to show up in the world for myself and for others? And if I know that I want to show up a certain way in the world, how can I do that within the context of setting this boundary, even if the other person pushes back?
I like that. And I like how you simplified it as well, because it's not easy, but there are ways to approach it where it can be easier, where you tackle the things like, I like the happy hour example, because a lot of people get super like worked up about like work events and saying no to people. Like I work for a company and we're remote, but we go to New York like quarterly, and there's always an after work event. And then there's always people on my team. Well, I always say, yeah, no, I'm not going. And then there's always like there's always the people who are like, I mean, do you think I should go? I'm probably going to go because then I don't want them. I was like, you do what you need to do for yourself. I was like, I mean, they were like, well, what, like, are you, and you're fine with I was like, yes, I say no because I need to go back to my room and I need some long time. Like, I don't see y'all all the time. And so I need, like, I've been on, like, when we're together, I'm dressed, I'm in front of you from 9 o'clock in the morning till like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's a lot. Like I am over, like I am like spilling over and I need to go back to quiet and just kick my feet up and watch TV.
Mhm.
I was like, it's just, I was like, that's just the boundary that I have. Like, I don't need to do the extra stuff.
Well, and I think that's the thing. I think it can be very, it can feel very challenging at the beginning. And then the more we flex the muscle, the more we practice,
Mhm.
the easier it gets for us, but also the more people begin to anticipate. So just another quick story from my
Mhm.
previous job. I was working as part of a team and there was a conference that was coming up. And I remember being in a room of people and my boss, the conference came up and my boss was asking, who want to do at the conference? And she had said something to the effect of, well, not Becky, but anybody else, like, does anybody else want to go? And I remember one of the people in the room said to me later, they were like, not Becky. Like that was, or maybe they said it at the time, because they thought it was like, oh, well, other than Becky, who wants to go? And they thought I was being excluded and they were very
Mhm.
confused. And I laughed and I said, oh, no, no. I said, she knows I'm not going. And so it was just, she wasn't even bothering to ask if I was going to this conference because at the time I was in a situation where I couldn't travel far from home. I needed to be geographically where I was for some
Mhm.
family stuff that was going on. And so it was just, it wasn't a slight. It was simply she had internalized my boundaries
Mhm.
around this is my need right now, needing to be in this geographic area for my family right now and not being able to travel and not being able to be from
Mhm.
home. And again, I didn't even have to say anything. But
Yeah.
because I had articulated that need previously, it was okay, well, I know this need exists and I respect it. And so
Mhm.
now it's kind of like, so when you teach people what is acceptable to you and what is not, or what
Right.
is within your scope and what is
Mhm.
not, or what you have the bandwidth for and what you don't, I think that you would be surprised at how quickly you flex that muscle and it becomes much easier. And also how quickly people will acclimate once you get comfortable holding a boundary and they realize that, well, pushing back isn't really going to get them anywhere. So they can probably just
Mhm.
save their breath.
Mhm. Exactly. Once you get to that point, yes, you have won. The boundaries have been set and they are being recognized.
Yes.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for those great examples, Becky. Tell us how the audience can work with you. And also, I know you have a freebie that you'd like to offer our community. So can you talk about that as well?
Yes. So that is called the People Pleaser's Guide to Saying No. And even if you do not consider yourself a people pleaser, I know some people, don't like that term. Some people are like, that is so me. But really, if you are somebody who is interested in boundaries, maybe you struggle with boundaries, or you'd like to get more comfortable with saying no to things and people that don't serve you,
Mhm.
that guide is for you. It will help get you started on this process because, again, it's a skill set that you need to build, right?
Mhm.
And so it will walk you through a process to help you do that. Um, and then in terms of working with me, I do private coaching right now. I am offering a 12-week program. So if folks are interested in that, they can always reach out to me at Becky at highergoodcoaching.com. And that's higher with a GH. And then I'm on all the socials. So if people are like, I don't know that I'm ready to work with a coach right now, but I'd love to stay connected. I encourage people to reach out, shoot me an email, follow me online and let's stay connected.
Awesome. Love it. Fantastic. All right, we're going to transition into three things with Becky. I'm going to ask you
All
three
right.
questions. Helps our audience get to know you a little bit better. So the first one is a two-parter. It is how do you start and end the day?
Okay, so I am a crazy dog lady. And so when you were talking about staying home with your dog, I was like, oh, she does speak my language. So my days start and end with my dog. So first thing I do in the morning is get up. We get up about 4:30 in the morning. And we do outside, we do food for the dogs. And then I do coffee and breakfast and have my quiet morning time with the dogs. And then I have a morning routine that consists of daily journaling, which is just a foundational thing for me. And then I do daily planning. So right now I do like planning around like, okay, what am I gonna like eat today? What am I gonna be focusing on in my business today? Because I feel like the quiet morning and kind of setting myself up for success is super important. And then interestingly, the last thing I do at night before I go to bed is feed my dogs, which I know probably sounds really strange, but one of my dogs has some GI issues that we discovered a couple of years ago that basically if she doesn't eat right before she goes to bed, she throws up in the middle of the night. So that's not fun to wake up to. So I kind of end my day by, feeding the dogs, taking them out. And then something that I have recently restarted is as part of my evening, quote unquote routine is listening to brown noise. Because they have all these different noise frequencies, and I had discovered brown noise, I guess it was last year sometime now. And I found that it is, I guess they say everybody's different, but I was playing the different noise frequencies and I discovered that brown noise is like super relaxing and just eases me right into sleep. So that is like what I like to do right before I go to bed.
Oh, nice. Very interesting. All right. Number two, what's a goal or intention that you've set for yourself this year and how's it going?
So one of the goals that I have set for myself this year is to really do a better job of taking care of myself physically. I had gotten into some really good habits, and then I had a few days where I was going through some stuff and I wasn't tending to those habits. And then I had a chronic injury flare up as a result. And so been kind of finding my way back. And so I'm excited for that. It's going well. Anybody out there who has a chronic or recurring injury probably knows that it has its ups and downs, but I'm very fortunate in that I have a good team of medical professionals and I have a lot of experience behind me. So I kind of know my limitations and I know how to get back on track. But I think that's one of the things that, again, it goes back to that, how we can take care of ourselves so that we can show up for others. And so I feel like just that focus on taking care of my physical health, especially, every year older, I'm having a birthday coming up soon. And it's like every year older, I have to remember that, that the key is longevity and longevity in a healthy way.
Amen to that. And the last question is, where are you currently finding inspiration?
So I find a lot of inspiration in really random places, I feel like. I have discovered it's so fascinating to me. Like I feel like my interests are all over the place. And I discovered a podcast recently. I won't curse on your show because I can't remember if you curse on your show, but the podcast is called Do You Effing Mind? But effing is obviously a different word. And it's a woman who's based out of Australia. And I think her background is it like neuroscience? And so she'll give like brain facts, but then she talks about different things. And she just has a really interesting perspective. And so I've really been getting into that lately because I feel like she'll say things and I'll be like, I say that too. Or like, oh, that's so right. And like, yes, like tell me more brain facts. I love it. So I like to nerd out on stuff like that. And really just, I try to get as much like mindset stuff as possible. And I think it's really important. One of the things I've been thinking about lately is I'm part of an accountability group and, for some of the health stuff I'm working on. And that has actually been really helpful to me. I've been I think accountability is important, but I've always kind of struggled in recent years with that external accountability piece because I'm like, well, I can give myself accountability But then I was like, well, let me join this accountability group and see how it goes. I had some, less than ideal experiences in the past, but I feel like I've been inspired there as well. So I encourage folks, if they're looking for inspiration, sometimes just surround yourself with people who are supportive. I'll share one more quick thing, and I know we have to wrap up, but like I recently went to brunch with some fellow business owners who I, have reconnected with this past year. And it was just a fun time and having like time with the ladies and joking and laughing. And I found that inspiring. So anywhere I think that you can find connection and find things that light you up can be super inspiring.
Agree. Awesome. Well, Becky, I have really enjoyed our time today. And before I let you go, I'm going to ask you for one more thing.
Okay.
Will you leave our audience with 3 things you'd like for them to take away from our conversation?
Absolutely. So I would say number one is please know that change is always possible and it is easier than you think it is to create. I think sometimes we think it's too hard to change. You can change no matter who you are, no matter what your circumstances, change is available to you and it's easier than you think. Number 2 is please remember, for those of you who struggle to set boundaries, especially, you can be simultaneously a wonderful, kind human being and set very, very strong boundaries. So those things are not mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say the third thing is, let's see, I had one in my head and it just left. So I would say the third thing that I want you to take away is just recognizing that creating a boundary is a skill. And like any skill, it absolutely can be learned. And that there are a lot of resources out there, including the free guide that I'm giving you. So look into those resources. Don't be afraid to dig in. Don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to lean into the process.
Awesome. Love those. Oh, well, thank you so much, Becky. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today. And I really appreciate you sharing with the community.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
Awesome. Stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back.